In Dallas, Texas, one man had a disagreement with the bank. His home sat adjacent to a tract of land on which the bank planned to build a new facility. The bank wanted to buy his house and tear it down so that they could build a bigger building. The man said, "No deal." His property had been appraised at just over $86,000, and he claimed that the bank had only offered him $68,000. The bank, of course, claimed that it had offered him more. 90 years old, the man had lived in his house for some 50 years. He didn't have to sell his home, and so he didn't. The bank wanted to build a building, and so it decided that it would. The result was a new bank building shaped like a horseshoe around the man's home. An automatic teller machine dispensed cash some 15 feet away from where the man slept. And cars of drive-through customers idled right in front of his kitchen window. These two parties may have been adjacent to one another, but they can scarcely be called neighbors. Those who walk in love do more than coexist, they cooperate. We are going to take a look today at what the Apostle Paul tells us is a characteristic of true Christian living. Today we are going to take a look at a passage in which he tells us that Christians are to seek to live in harmony with each other and that we are to live in peace with everyone. So let's take a look at Romans chapter 12, verses 14 through 18. Now in verses 14 through 16, we will see that Christians should live in harmony with other Christians. And in verses 17 through 18, we will see that the apostle commands us to live in peace with everyone so far as we're able. Let's take a look at the passage. Romans chapter 12, beginning with verse 14. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Now, in verses 14 through 16, we see that Paul's exhortations in this passage relate to a believer's reaction to other people's actions and their emotions. Let's take a look at verse 14. Verse 14 says, "Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them." Now, the first phrase, "bless those who persecute you," the word bless in the Greek is literally a good word. And it means to find a good word to speak to someone who hates and persecutes you. Now, it's relatively easy to find good words to say to those we like or even love. It is much harder to find good words to speak to those who hate us. Now, I'm not talking about flattery. Flattery is an excessive and insincere praise meant to manipulate somebody. And we might use flattery sometimes to encourage someone who hates us to stop persecution. But that is not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about insincere good words. We're talking about really good words. Now, the word persecute in verse 14 is taken from a root word in the Greek, which means to pursue, and it means to pursue with evil intent. It basically means that a person is initiating evil attacks upon someone else. This person is so consumed with hatred for you that they will initiate a painful attack on your life. And they will do so in haste because they hate you so much. This is the person that Paul exhorts us to speak a good word to. Now, the best word that we can speak to someone who hates us or hates Christians is the gospel. The gospel is a good word. And when we speak the gospel to someone who hates us, they may reject it. But it is a good word that we can speak to them. Paul goes even further because in the next phrase of verse 14, Paul writes this, "Bless and do not curse them." The natural human response to painful, hateful attacks is to attack in return, to seek vengeance, to inflict physical pain. But if we can't do that, if we're powerless to inflict revenge upon them, a curse is the next possible action that we could take. And a curse is essentially asking God to bring pain upon the attacker, to avenge us. It means that we realize that we are not in a position to hurt the person ourselves, but we wish that God, we even ask if God would inflict painful revenge on that person. And don't you see what the Apostle Paul is saying? He's saying not only should you not seek revenge on those who persecute you, but you should not even wish that they would be hurt. Rather, we are to find a good word to speak to them. We are to speak the gospel to them. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, verse 44, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Loving your enemy means that rather than wishing that God would strike them down or that you could get vengeance, you desire their eternal salvation, and so you speak the good words of the gospel to them. So in this verse we see that we are to speak a good word of the gospel to those who persecute us, but in the next verse we see what we are to do and to feel when someone experiences the extreme emotions, whether good or bad. So let's take a look at verse 15. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Now this verse has to do with empathy for both Christians and non-Christians. This kind of empathy is not natural to most human beings. Although there are some human beings who just have a natural sense of empathy, most of us typically are just so wrapped up in our own joys and sorrows, and we don't have time to empathize with other people. Now, the exhortation to empathize means that we are to enter into close personal relationships with other people. Have you ever noticed that if you read about a tragic event in the newspaper, it may not affect you emotionally at all, but if the newspaper is relating something about a family member or someone close to you, you feel that. Being close to the person determines whether you feel strong feelings with them. The exhortation is really an exhortation to enter into close personal relationships with others to such an extent that we feel their pain and we feel their joy. So in verse 14, we have seen that we should speak good words to those who persecute us. We should speak the gospel to them. But in verse 15, we saw that we should have close personal relationships with Christians and non-Christians to such an extent that we feel their very emotions alongside them. But in verse 16, we see the exhortation to live in harmony. Let's take a look at verse 16. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Now, the first phrase of this verse is live in harmony with one another. Living in harmony is really an interpretation of the Greek words. The Greek literally says the same goal thinking. Now, living in harmony is a good translation of the idea behind the same goal thinking. For instance, most of you know that I sing in a local choral group, and there are various groups within the choir. There are first and second sopranos, first and second altos, first and second tenors, basses, and baritones, all made up of different vocal talents. To sing in such a way as to sound good together, we all need to know the music, we all need to listen to each other and blend our voices, and we all need to sing with the same dynamics, either loud or soft. We need a director to help us come in together and to end the song together, and to help us know when to sing loudly and when to sing softly. This choral group is made up of all kinds of people, men and women, rich and poor, young and old, but because we have the same goal thinking, in other words, we're singing in harmony, we sound like a choir rather than just a rabble of people singing something similar. A church needs to work in the same way. We must all think the same goal. We must all think about worshiping Jesus and serving him to the best of our ability under the leadership of our head, Jesus Christ. In the next phrase, Paul addresses the great enemy of harmonious living. He writes, do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly, never be wise in your own sight. He is addressing the great enemy of harmonious living, pride. Haughty is just an old English word for pride. If you think that you are above associating with whoever you may think is lowly, you are thinking in a haughty way. If you think that the church is made up of some high people and some low people, you are thinking in a prideful way. We are all equal before God, according to the Scriptures. If you think that you are wiser than anyone else or better than anyone else, you are thinking in a way that is haughty. Now let's sum up verses 14 through 16. Paul exhorts us to speak good words to those who hate us. Speak the gospel to those who hate us. He tells us to know each other well enough that we can enter into the emotional state of others. And finally, he tells us to forego pride and to live as if we had the same goal. If we do these things, we live in harmony with those around us. In verses 17 and 18, Paul tells us to live in peace with everyone. In verses 14 through 16, Paul gave us advice about how to get along with both Christians and non-Christians. But in verses 17 and 18, Paul limits his advice on how to get along simply with non-Christians. Let's take a look at verse 17. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. The first phrase is repay no one evil for evil. This is essentially a definition of revenge. Revenge is seeking to get back at someone who's done evil to me, to do evil to them because they've done evil to me. Christians are never to seek revenge. Have you ever noticed how popular revenge movies are? A hero is treated badly by some people he trusts, and the rest of the movie is about how he plans and plots to get back at them. And often he treats them as badly as they treated him in the beginning, and sometimes he even treats them worse. Christians are never to repay evil for evil. Rather, Christians are to do what Paul exhorts us to do in the next phrase, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. Rather than thinking about how to get even with someone, we are supposed to think carefully about how to do what is honorable in the sight of everyone. How do we live honorably in a world that loves revenge and pride and evil? Well, the best way is to reflect on the life of Jesus Christ, because he treated everyone honorably. He didn't agree with everyone, and sometimes he even confronted people, but he always did so in an honorable way. If we follow the example of Jesus Christ, we are going to act in a way that's honorable. Now in verse 18, Paul says this, if possible, as far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Now first, notice that Paul recognizes that it is not always going to be possible to live in peace. Sometimes people won't accept an apology. Sometimes they won't be willing to forgive. They may not desire to live in peace with you. They may want to persecute you because they hate you. But we, as Christians, are to make every effort that we can to live in peace. Now, second, notice that Paul specifically tells us to live in peace with everyone, with all, he says. Even the people who make themselves our enemies, who hate us and persecute us, we are to seek to live in peace with them. Now, how do we apply these verses? Number one, do you know somebody who hates you? Have you thought about praying that God would give you an opportunity to share the gospel with them? 2, get to know your neighbors so well that when they're rejoicing, you rejoice. And when they're hurting, you hurt with them. 3, the next time someone hurts you, think about how Jesus treated you when you hurt him. During her second year at nursing school, one student was given a pop quiz by her professor. She breezed through all the first 9 questions until she got to the last one. The question was, what is the name of the woman who cleans our school? Surely, the student nurse thought, this is some kind of joke. She had seen the woman cleaning the floors in the bathrooms, but really, how was she expected to know the woman's name? She handed in her paper without answering that last question. Before class ended, one of the students asked if the last question counted toward their grades. Absolutely, said the professor. In your careers, you will meet many people. All are significant. They deserve your attention and care, even if all you do is smile and say hello. The student nurse never forgot that lesson, and she learned the name of the cleaning lady. It was Dorothy. We have not begun to show the love of Christ for others until we have treated them all with respect.